On my clock, it's my watch. It's 10:15, so we will go ahead and get started. Our first speaker this session is Jim Muir, and we will do our best to stay on time as it is in the schedule. So, got a couple minutes left. I'll stand up and give you notice.
I appreciate it. Thank you all for being here at the first session of the our first volunteer session, not the first session. So my talk today is going to be essentially about transitioning grasslands from traditional livestock production to bioenergy. And I'd like to recognize my co-authors, some of whom are in the audience. I have co-authors from Texas A&M AgriLife, from Texas A&M University at Kingsville, LSU, Louisiana State University, and Missouri. So welcome, and thank you for that, the input on this. The funding for this current project, there'll be several that we're going to be talking about today, but the one that is currently discussed was provided by Department of Energy and U.S. Department of Agriculture, in the U.S. federal government. So the original idea that we had was to address this issue that we have been unable to convince land managers to produce bioenergy feedstocks from grasslands, simply because there wasn't a market. It's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. You don't have a market, so you're not going to have production. You're not going to have production because you don't have a market. And so how do you break out of that? And so our argument was that because of this failure to convince landowners and industry to start, we proposed, and we've done a series of experiments looking at multiple use, multi-species grazing or grassland systems that help transition, or at least add flexibility to a system in which bioenergy production is one of those uses or products from the land. And it reflects also a flexibility in terms of response to climate and markets, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. So I'll be talking about diversity over and over again and on various levels when it comes to this research. The most important one probably is climate. And when we're talking climate in grasslands, at least when I think of climate, I'm thinking primarily of rainfall, the variability from year to year, within year, in other words, seasonal variabilities, and long-term changes in the climate as well. So those are not the only factors involved. I think the lack of transition to use of grasslands for bioenergy production or bioenergy feedstock production is primarily a market issue. When the price of oil goes up, there's a lot more interest in biofuels. When it goes down, less interest. But those market interests are driven by the various interests of the landowners. Historically, at least within the Great Plains of the United States, in North America, livestock has been the most important. So if we're trying to take production away from livestock to give it to bioenergy, we're going to have to convince land managers that bioenergy is feasible or fits into a livestock system. There are other options involved, some of which overlap. Hay production will probably compete with feedstock production for bioenergy, but maybe not. Old hay is perfectly good for feedstock, for example, and not so good for the cattle. We culturally value hunting in this country. We don't apologize for it. And so wildlife income from land is very much a factor in North America, in the United States especially, and more the ecosystem services that we derive from those lands are important in terms of some of the multiple uses. So with diversity, I think we've heard this over and over again, the benefits of biodiversity within the ecosystem. There are both positives and negatives that we can benefit from. You can read for yourself. I'm not going to read every single word up there. And that biodiversity is reflected in the biology of the system as much as it is within the marketing of the system or the management of the system. That greater diversity, I'd like to point out, can also be found in the animals that we have on there. And this is a pet peeve of mine, or a pet topic of mine, always talking about animal biodiversity that should reflect plant biodiversity. But it can also be found in the soils, as we heard in today's first talk. The microbiome, the plants, the animals, all of that biodiversity plays into what we consider to be the diversity of these grasslands. And when I talk about diversity, I'm talking also about different canopies, not just the herbaceous canopy, because as grassland ecologists or scientists, we tend to think only of the herbaceous level or canopy, and other canopies can contribute as well. And below the soil surface. I'm an agronomist, so I tend to think of the plant. If you're an animal scientist, think of the animal, and we often forget about the soil. And below the soil, if we have biodiversity in the plant species above the soil, then we can have different functional groups under the soil in terms of depth of root and types of root and so forth. And that can all enhance the productivity. In terms of animals, we can play a lot with the metabolic rates, extremely important to deal with that. Obviously, different metabolic rates require different feeding strategies and levels and qualities. The selectivity of the animals. I like these pictures because they're very graphic in terms of the anatomy of animals and how they are very specialized in how they harvest, and we can use that ability or inability to harvest plants to our benefit in terms of diversity within the system. Not just in terms of architecture, but also in terms of season. Because where we come from, we have two different growing seasons, the cool and the warm season, very different plant species in those two systems, and the forage nutritive value is also very different in those. All of this adds up to greater or less productivity per area. So a lot of factors that we can play with here. And it doesn't matter where you come from around the world. I know I'm talking about the Great Plains of North America, but wherever you come from around the world, your system has its biodiversity, and whether you're transitioning to bioenergy feedstocks or not, taking advantage of that biodiversity is important. Just to give you a little bit of background information, these are our grasslands. I think one of the speakers this morning pointed them out very well. Texas is down here. We like to think we don't have to point out where we are, but for those of you who are not from the States, so we're in the southern part of the Great Plains. And as I said, bimodal rainfall system, and a lot of variable climates that we'll talk about. And the seasonal extremes are a huge factor when it comes to forage and animal adaptation. We also look a lot at natives versus exotics. Because of that seasonal variability, we are forced to work more and more with natives because the exotics simply don't survive here. Just to give you an idea, on the eastern side of the state, we have about 1,400 millimeters. On the western side, about 300 millimeters. So quite a bit of variability in the system, and that variability requires very different forages as well as animal production within those two systems. Same thing with the temperatures, about a 10 degrees centigrade difference from south to north. Some of it's latitude, some of it's proximity to the Gulf of Mexico. So, as a summary of some of the research that we've done, I'm not going to bore you with a lot of data. I'm going to talk about generalities and what we've found in the past. Introduced species. We have looked at introduced species just to be able to compare them with our natives. We're not averse to using exotics, but they do have the red flags. We've looked at warm season and cool season and primarily annual legumes. Perennial introduced species just don't survive. The tropicals don't survive our winter, and the temperates don't survive our summers, so we're stuck with the annuals. And grasses as well, more or less the same thing, although we have looked at more perennials. We have looked at bunch grasses and then Bermuda grass as well, Cynodon, Dactylon, in terms of dual purpose systems. My personal passion is with the native species, and we've done a lot more work in those. Again, with the legumes, very few cool season legumes that are native. And for example, in my area of north central Texas, we have almost 50 distinct species, native species of herbaceous legumes. Let me repeat that. 50 different native herbaceous species in our area that we can work with. It's a very typical semi-arid climate diversity. That those of you from the temperate, I'm from the tropics, so when I think of the tropics as being temperate, those of you who come from cold climates don't probably have that biodiversity to work with. In terms of grasses, we work again primarily with the warm season grasses, and most of those are bunch grasses that we work with. So the mixtures that we look at, and I think the mixtures are where the benefit is, where the greatest productivity is. We look at mixtures of forbs and grasses, and when you see forbs, I'm a legume person, so what I really mean are legumes, but I'll pay lip service to the others. We do have quite a few different forbs in our prairies, native prairies, that are useful for the mixtures that we look at. Natives and warm season, all of those are far more productive than their counterparts. So more productive than cool season, more productive than the exotics, more productive than the monocultures. And when we look at dual purpose, what we look at is multiple harvests over the season, which are equivalent to forages, and a single harvest at the end of the season, which is our equivalent of the bioenergy harvest. And they both have their benefits. So the mixtures are superior. This is sort of a summary of our multiple trials. Multiple harvests, obviously better for forage, a single harvest better for bioenergy, and the warm season has the greatest yield. And the dual purpose is very much dependent on rainfall. If it's a high rainfall year, you're going to need your forage throughout the year. You're not going to have anything left over at the end of the year to harvest for bioenergy. Did I say high rainfall? The opposite, low rainfall year. So high rainfall year, it's going to be a good year for accumulating bioenergy feedstocks, because you'll have a lot of leftover forage at the end of the year that your livestock wasn't able to keep up with. That's when you need to harvest. And hence the flexibility of the system, where you can do livestock as well as bioenergy, depending on the year, depending on the market, and so forth. We like to take a holistic approach to this, and that includes very much the human element, and that human element is often the market. Politics as well as economics play a role in whether bioenergy feedstocks are going to make it or not. And I like to call this the Tao of grasslands. Not to fight nature, but to go with what nature offers and what it has. And so our proposal, based on all of our research, is that we should reverse centuries of monocultures that we've derived or learned primarily from Europeans, our European ancestors, and go back to back to the future, as they say, back to what was here before Europeans arrived, which is a biodiverse system that's very flexible and very reflective of what can be done. And that diversity, again, is involved in markets and climates and resilience and sustainability of the systems, as well as ecosystem and human health. So thank you very much.
Is Amaresh Shatara here? No?
Does that mean I have to answer questions for 15 minutes?
Maybe we can. Is Katrin? Well, let's go ahead and load your talk. And any other any other speakers that haven't loaded their talks, let's do this while we've got a little time.
I must look if it's better to see it there.
Yeah. Let's see, we'll close him out.
It's on the desk.
Yeah.
No, it's on the desk.
You've already loaded it on here?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. You're not next. I was just going to load your talk. So I didn't see that it was on here already.
Hmm?
So you'll be on at 11 o'clock.
Yes.
Okay. So you're good.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't need to do anything.
Do I have it now? Or?
No, I didn't realize your talk was on there. That's my fault. Okay. Yes, we got, yeah, if. James, we've got a couple of questions, if you don't mind, since we got time. But if you come up to the mic so we can have it recorded for posterity's sake.
Absolutely. Questions? Yes, sir.
I didn't really understand anything about what you call biofuel feedstock. This is material dried out at the end of the season, baled, used for fuel, used for processing for second generation fuels, or what?
Yes, all of that. What inspired me to think about this, and we're following the same thing with some biochar research that we're doing, is that there's a lot of wasted hay. I don't know how hay is in where you come from, but the hay market in the southern Great Plains is very variable when it comes to availability. So on a good rainfall year, you can buy hay for almost nothing.
Jim will put this talk on.
Okay, and so on a low rainfall year, hay is very expensive but unavailable. And so what happens is in good rainfall years, a lot of hay is produced, stocked, put away, but not sold because the price is so low and the demand is so low. So those are what I call the feedstocks. One of the questions that my co-author, Dr. Naumann, just asked me is are there any processing plants for bioenergy, second generation, fibrous type of bioenergy feedstocks in Texas? There are none that I'm aware of. And so hence the conundrum of whether, if I were a landowner, I would not switch from livestock production to bioenergy feedstock production without a market, without a guaranteed market. I have to pay my bills. And so that's the issue, is how to transition from simple livestock to either a multiple use system that includes livestock. Yes, there are all sorts of options because I've seen systems, for example, in Colorado, in which they were using pressure and heat to produce basically a biodiesel or an oil compressed from fibrous material. I always think of fibrous material as being combusted, and then you capture the heat But you can also digest them and catch the gas, but you can also, heat them and compress them. I'm not an engineer, and make it into oil, which is what we're used to in our economy. So there are all those options, but as far as the landowner is concerned and a market, none of those exist. And so the Department of Energy in this country has been very frustrated and spent a lot of money working on such things as switchgrass or sorghum, monocultures that are dedicated to bioenergy production without any significant contribution to the energy economy of the country, because landowners are unwilling to take the risk when there's no market for it. So hence this whole series of studies. Long-winded answer. Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you, sir. We'll wait till 10:45 to start the next talk, so we stay on time. So as people go between rooms, they can catch their speakers. So, and if you're a speaker and we haven't got your program on yet, let me know and we'll get that done, so we don't waste your speaking time getting a presentation on. The speaker, yeah. One speaker's missing. The speaker that should be going right now, and then. Correct. Yeah. Yep. And then the 11:45, I haven't seen. I haven't seen a speaker yet, but so we're 10:45 is here, and 11 o'clock is here, and 11:15 is here, and 11:30 is here. So we're just killing time till then.
4 out of 6.
Correct.
No reflection on the
It's all moderated. Yes, I understand. Hoosiers can take it. We'll take the blame.
So is this where we mix up the speakers and the presentations, and they draw which presentation they're going to give?
I was given very clear instructions not to deviate.
Yes.
Yes. And it was made very clear to me.
It's just, I've been to meetings where they didn't maintain.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
Yeah. I'll get over here. We'll start early.
Any questions that you want me to do?
Yes, does that make sense?
That's exactly right, sir.
this off out of the side here.
If she comes, if the speaker does come, no, we'll stay on order as it is in the book. Right. We could do it at the very end, but we're not gonna change the order. Yeah, yeah. And, Mahinda? Yeah, I just wanna make sure I was pronouncing it correctly. Mahinda. Mahinda Singh. Okay, I'll do my best. Tower, yes. I manage one of the experiment stations, actually. Yeah, so we're about 200 miles away from campus. Animal science is my training. Animal science, animal husbandry. Yes. Yeah. All right, we'll go ahead and get back started. Our next topic is soil biological stimulants, increased fertilizer and legume response, and Peter Espy will be our speaker.
We're here at this session because we're interested in innovation and new ways that we can apply grassland science to address some of the most fundamental problems that are facing humanity, which is how to feed the world while looking after the world. And one of the most significant recent developments in grassland science has been the recognition of the fundamental importance of the soil microbiome. The most recent comprehensive review on agriculture and food production, that's by the United Nations FAO in 2020, simply concludes it's a game changer. And what we're going to look at today is one of the techniques which is novel about how we can manipulate the soil microbiome to increase agricultural production. And first, as a background before we start, we'll look at some of the previous research that's been done in crop science in the US using biostimulants that were produced by a company called BioAg. And what the biostimulants do, as you can see in this diagram, is that when added to the best industry fertilizer standard practice, they increase production. 13% for cotton, 16% for corn, 16% for soybeans. Those are the averages of 5-year trials. That's the average increase. And these are independent trials carried out in the US. And if you want to read the experimental details, they're in the BioAg websites. That raised the question, how do biostimulants affect pasture production? New Zealand trials started in 2016, looking at sheep and beef farms, high-intensity dairy farms. And the increase when added to standard fertilizers was 17%, with dairy up to 28%. Now, that has established that the biostimulants are working in improved agronomic systems. But 54% of the world's grasslands are rangelands. So that was the next question. How do biostimulants actually affect rangeland production? So we started a rangeland trial in 2018. It's, as everyone knows, New Zealand's comprised of 3 islands, and these trials are on the middle of the South Island. The site itself is at 500 metres, low fertility tolerant grasses with annual legumes, and the climate is semi-arid, 500 mils average rainfall, but it can drop to half that, 250 or less, or 10 to 20 inches in imperial. Semi-arid, like a continental climate, hot summers, cold winters, drought prone. And the productivity of these natural systems is very low. The reason it's low is because of the soils. These are silts deposited over gravels, variable in depth from 8 to 20 inches, 25 to 50 centimetres, extremely low in all nutrients, and extremely high in exchangeable aluminium. And what we did in this trial was to apply two forms of biological stimulant. The first is a solid form, which is using reactive phosphate rock that has had biological stimulants added to it, coupled with sulfur and lime, which are the traditional and recommended fertilizers for these soils, 250 kilograms per hectare of biologically activated rock, or BAP, 50 kg per hectare of sulfur, 500 kg per hectare of lime. And then we added a liquid biostimulant called soil and seed from 4 to 12 litres per hectare. The solid fertiliser was applied in winter, and the liquid fertiliser was applied in spring. This is the spring pasture response 6 months after solid fertiliser. Two months later, that's a response. When you look at what's happening, you've got in the middle the untreated grassland, bioactive phosphorus by itself on the left, and the combination of bioactive phosphorus and soil and seed on the right. When you look at these native New Zealand rangeland soils, they're highly degraded. You have low fertility grasses, which are sparse, invasive daisy from Europe called Heracea pilosella, which outcompetes the native species and creates bare ground around it by extracting soil water, extracting nutrients, and putting in plant poisons. And as a result of that, these systems, degraded systems, are very, very low producing. On the right, you can see the plot adjacent to the control we saw last time. And you notice immediately the increase in grasses and the increase in the resident legume, which is an annual legume called Trifolium arvense, or hare's foot trefoil. And as such, this addresses one of the great problems of erosion with wind. These soils, since 1950, have lost 2 inches, 5 centimetres. We know that because of the radioactive cesium 138 that got dropped from Bikini Atoll. So, that's a problem worldwide, the degradation of grasslands. How do we restore them? That's the central and fundamental question. And is there new techniques, new tools that we can use to address that? Let's look at the response of the biostimulant by itself. The first point to note is that this increases rate responsive. We've got a 17% increase. The second point to note is that that response has occurred in 7 weeks. The soil microbiome and stimulation of the soil microbiome is extremely dynamic. Now, that tells us that stimulation of the soil microbiome is providing nutrients that were inaccessible into the grassland system before. There's absolutely no nutrient content being added in the soil and seed. When we look at adding in the biologically activated phosphorus, sulfur and lime, in the blue graph we get a 60% increase in production. But just look at what happens when you combine biologically activated phosphorus with the soil and seed biostimulant. The synergy is 120% production increase. So what we're looking at is a powerful new tool that improves fertilizer efficiency and a powerful tool that acts completely independently of fertilizers. And this idea of stimulating the soil microbiome to address the questions which Peter introduced last night in his talk, I think holds enormous potential. But that's not all. Have a look at the effects on the composition of the pastures. On the left-hand graph, we've got the bare soil. You notice it's got bare soil, grass, and weeds. And then the next three bars show the effect of the soil and seed biostimulant applied by itself. You can see some interesting trends. First of all, the decrease in bare soil. Secondly, the decrease in weeds. The increase in grass. And if you look very carefully, you'll see a very thin band, and that is the increase in legumes. So that is biostimulant acting entirely by itself. But when you combine the biostimulants with the addition of phosphorus and sulfur, you completely transform the composition of those pastures. You eliminate bare ground, almost eliminate your weeds, and you switch to legume dominance. And this legume fixes 130 to 150 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. And that infusion of carbon plus nitrogen builds up soil structure, builds up soil resilience, and builds up ecosystem stability. So there are environmental benefits with that. Now, in our trial, we also did something else. We drilled alfalfa right across the trial site. And this is a test indicator that completely eliminates the possibility that we're just picking up patch responses due to clover distribution or anything like that. And if you look at this in the foreground, you'll see legumes, and in the background, you'll see nothing. The alfalfa density data supports what I've just told you in the biomass and the thing response. Small response with the soil and seed, large response with biological activated phosphorus. So the conclusions are, one, we have a new tool that we can use to address these fundamental problems right across the world. Biological stimulants increase production and they increase legume composition that fixes biological nitrogen. 17% increase alone, 60% bioactive phosphate, and 120% combined. 85% increase in legume production. And number two, it opens a question: is this a viable new pathway towards achieving sustainable agriculture? Open for questions with my co-authors Anton Barton and Steve Haswell from BioAg Australia and New Zealand.
Thank you, sir. Got time for one question while we bring up our next presentation, if there is one.
Is there economic analysis to go along with it? The production numbers are good, but we don't know what the cost is.
Yeah, sure. The cost of application in this is really low, $10 New Zealand per litre for soil and seed. And when you run the economic analysis, it's a no-brainer. Steve Haswell from BioAg could comment further on that. He's present with us from 2 in the morning. Any comments there, Steve? No. No, he says. Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. We'll stay on time. We'll move on to our next presenter. Is it okay there, or you want it back on the podium?
Yeah.
And then I'll stand up when you have 2 minutes left. Our next presenter is Katrin Kuta, and she'll be speaking on assessment of soil structure and root patterns by means of X-ray computed thermography and temperature grassland sites. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. My co-author is Monika Joschko, and I will show now some results from our study, which were inside the biodiversity exploratories. This is a large-scale and long-term functional biodiversity research experiment. There are 3 exploratories in Germany, Schorfheide-Chorin, Hainich-Dün, and Swabian Alb. And the study objective is the understanding of the relationship between biodiversity of different taxa and levels, the rule of land use and management for biodiversity, and the rule of biodiversity for ecosystem processes and functionalities. And there are by-side of forestry plots in each exploratory 50 grassland plots, which are meadows, pastures, and mown pastures, and they're fertilized and unfertilized with a land use intensity range. And I have taken from every plot the undisturbed soil cores, but I will present here only 31 plots from the Swabian Alb due to the same soil type, and for that I can compare the parameters on the same soil type. To collect really undisturbed soil samples, we have developed a new mechanical device which excavates the outer circle around the soil core by means of a rotating attachment, and simultaneously cuts the soil was cutted by a sharp edge attached to the plexiglass cylinder, and at the same time push the plexiglass cylinder over the soil core. And so we had really undisturbed soil cores by a size of 12 centimeters in height and diameter, and from which one we have collect smaller ones, also with a device which collect really undisturbed soil cores. And now I will give a short introduction in 3D X-ray computer tomography. That's a radiographic non-destructive method, and which makes X-ray absorption measurements. And for that, there can generate a reconstructed 3D image of an object, and from this object, 3D geometric measurements can carried out, and it's possible to differentiate objects with different densities. At first, you get an image stack, and with the reconstruction, you get an 3D image of the object, and afterwards, the qualitative and quantitative analysis is possible. For instance, the volume, surface, and connectivity of the soil. All these bigger samples were scanned by a medical X-ray CT with a lower resolution, and all the smaller samples were scanned by a micro X-ray CT, and this was carried out by the Leibniz Institute for Zoo and Wildlife Research, and the micro CT measurements were carried out by the BAM. And due to the lower resolution for the micro CT, for the medical CT, it's only possible to distinguish between the solid and pore phase, but it's not term of this presentation. With the micro CT, it's possible to distinguish between the pores, the roots, and the solids. And this is a combination of a gray value analysis with thresholds, here about 35 and 75 to distinguish between the pores due to the gray value, and a space transformation. So at first I've removed the acrylic glass cylinder and collect the solid space, and due to a similar density of water, air, and roots, I've inverted this space and get then the space of pores and roots together. And inside this space, it was easier to collect the roots. And then you can get also such a 3D image of a root system inside the soil. And here are more impressions of the solid phase and roots inside these soils. And the qualitative characteristics of root images and the quantitative estimated parameters were really similar with in the replications of one plot. And with this method, it's possible to estimate the solid volume, the root volume, the pore volume, solid surface, and the root surface, and also the solid surface volume ratio, which is a parameter of soil structure, so-called surface density. And I have compared this method also with a normal method where the root were outwashed and the results were really similar. Now I come to the results of these 31 plots, and there's a close relationship between the pore volume and the solid volume. With the increase of the solid volume, you get a decrease of the pore volume, which is really known. And also with a higher root volume, lower, no, in our direction. With increasing of solid volume, you have a decrease of root volume. And with an increase of root volume, there's a more structured soil, which is really significant, and also the root surface is significant higher with the increasing of the solid surface volume ratio. That means if you have more roots inside the soil, that you have a better structured soil. And now we are looking in comparison of the utilization. There you can see that a pasture often has more, more roots than the meadows and mown pastures. This is significant higher the root volume here, and also the root surface, and also the solid surface volume ratio. That means pastures are more structured and they have more roots inside the soil. Then I have looked to the cutting frequency, which is a parameter of land use intensity. 0 means here that's pasture. And this is 1 to 3 cuts. It's a medium land use intensity, 1 times in a year. So maybe it will be clearer if I look for higher cutting frequencies, but here we can see only a trend that we have a decrease of pore volume with increasing of cutting frequency, and also for the roots there's only a trend. There are no significant differences beside the solid volume. But for the fertilization, we can see a clear differentiation. When the soil is unfertilized or fertilized, there's a there are more solid volume. The solid surface is lower, and also the structure, and especially the roots are more developed in soils without fertilization. Yeah, to conclude that, we are able to sample really undisturbed soil samples, and there is a plot-specific soil structure property and root networks that we have found out, and it exists a strong relationship between soil structure and root systems, and between soil structure and land use. And as an outlook, now I have, since November 2022, own CT with a higher resolution, and also such a device to collect really undisturbed soil samples. And for that, it's also possible to distinguish between different root diameters, where we can look for root volumes, root surfaces, also for pores and solid soil, for what is the amount of here root volume per root diameter. And as you can see, the highest volume is find out for the really fine roots inside the soil. And for that, many thanks for your attention, please.
We have time for a few questions.
Do you think you could be able to separate between grass and legume, or different species of their roots, or just the total?
If I collected this all together, but maybe if I look in monocultures, then I have a different system, and maybe I need a specialist for that to distinguish between the roots from a legume or grass. But what we could do is to look in monocultures only with legumes and grassland, and look what is different.
So out of curiosity, I have sort of two questions in one. So when you're doing multiple cutting, does that cut with like a piece of equipment, and like the impact on pore volume be related to the equipment like driving on the field? And I guess if so, did you notice like any differences in not just like the pore volume, but kind of how those pores were shaped?
Yes, it's possible. With the new system, where we have a really good resolution, and also with the computer program, it's able to look what is the shape and give an answer for that. But this is a task for the future issue. But I will do that.
Any more questions? Yes, sir.
What was the cutting frequency? How often were you cutting your species?
Here it was about from 1 to 3, but normally in Germany we have 1 to 5. But in this, in this case it was only up to 3. And I guess I will get other results for higher intensity.
Thank you very much. We'll switch speakers. Thank you. All right. Our next speaker is David Pedro Tango,
Prado Tarango.
Tarango, and he is going to visit with us on soil carbon monitoring programs for sheep ranches and dryland ecosystems. Thank you, sir.
Okay, just let me check this. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. Thank you very much for being here today and for this opportunity for me to speak with all of you. So yeah, I am David Prado Tarango from Oregon State University. And today I am going to be talking about the Soil Carbon Initiative study that we are conducting over there, which is a monitoring program for ranches in dry land environments. So just to give you a quick overview, one of the first things that I would like to keep clear is that soil carbon sequestration, which is kind of the result of plants from taking the CO2 in the atmosphere and putting back into the soil as a result of their photosynthesis, has become a really important topic in recent years because we know and understand the increases in atmospheric carbon as a result of human activities. And we have multiple ecosystems that have the natural ability to fix carbon into the soil. But in many cases, we need to incorporate different types of management activities in order to benefit or increase the carbon sequestration of many areas. And at the same time, by having proper management practices that incorporate carbon sequestration in the soil, we are actually benefiting soil infiltration, wildlife habitat, and many of the other goods and services from ecosystems. So a proper management practice that incorporates carbon sequestration can be a good indicator of sustainable land management. And some ecosystems that have that really good possibility or potential for sequestering carbon are rangelands, which historically have been perfect ecosystem for livestock production. But we also, as scientists, we know that livestock production can not sometimes is criticized as not being sustainable because of the methane emissions that animals have. So we have been doing research to try to understand how we can incorporate sustainable practices that can be used with livestock production to at the same time sequester carbon and have a healthy ecosystem. But we also know and understand that measuring carbon sequestration on rangelands is challenging because in most cases, rangelands or grazing areas are really big areas that we need to, and are not so easy to work or study. So because of this, we actually had the opportunity in which a group of farmers or ranchers came to us at Oregon State to ask how we can help them to measure soil carbon sequestration on their private lands from their grazing operations and how we can measure or provide them with guidance and information on how they can sequester more carbon. In many cases, they actually want to start learning how to do things right and do a better use of their ecosystem. So that's where the Carbon Initiative came in. So basically, we had two main objectives: to see how much carbon these people have on their ranches and what activities they can do to incorporate more carbon or to reduce the emissions that their current operations may be having on the ecosystem, and also know what are the emissions from their activities. Because one thing is how much carbon they have in the soil, but the other thing is how much emissions their operations are releasing to the atmosphere. So we have those main questions that we wanted to provide with information. So basically, to answer these, we had to select sampling points on these areas, these ranches. We collected soil from all of these places. We analyzed those samples in the lab to see how much carbon they have. And then we used a computer model, which is the Comet Farm model, to modulate or estimate the emissions of all of the operations of these ranches on those particular areas, and also try to modulate sustainable management practices that they could incorporate on their activities and see if that can actually reduce the emissions of their operations. With that, we can produce a summary that we can give to the land managers to understand what's going on their areas, and eventually that information, the purpose is that it can be reviewed by the scientific community for publication and accuracy. And we know that every project has to start somewhere. So we started this project in one ranch that is located in the state of Oregon here in the United States. This is a private ranch that is composed of 32,000 acres of private land, mostly composed of natural sagebrush, steppe grass grasslands. And what made this place really unique for this type of study is that they actually have 20 years of recorded sustainable management practices on their lands. So in the past 20 years, they have already been doing sustainable management practices, but they don't know what's the effect on soil carbon on their lands. So that's why they wanted to know what was going on the areas and if that actually was giving some benefit to them. So we went to the area. We selected 21 monitoring or sampling points that represent the most important parts of the ranch, and 3 control points to start doing our analysis. We collected soil on each one of these sampling points at 2 depths, at 20 centimeters and 60 centimeters depth, to see the differences in carbon in the shallow area of the soil, which is going to be like the more dynamic part of the soil, and then deeper, which we will expect to see more stable carbon and even some types of inorganic carbon. We took those samples and sent those to the lab for analysis using the dry combustion method at Oregon State University, and obtained the percentage of soil carbon per sample. With that, we were able to estimate the soil carbon mass per area just by multiplying the percentage of carbon plus the bulk density of the soil plus the depth of the soil sample. And with that, eventually we were able to extrapolate the results to the hectares of the area that we're analyzing. Also, we are sampling this area twice a year, early in the growing season and late in the growing season, to see how much the carbon changes during the seasons and year by year. We started doing this sampling in the field in 2020, so we have right now 3 years of data collected in this area. And now, knowing how much carbon we have in the soil, now we have the question to understand how much emissions they are doing. So we use the Comet Farm model, which is a really interesting tool that gives us the ability to put in there their management practices, and then it will modulate the emissions that those practices are producing in the ecosystem. Then we can create multiple scenarios in which we can modify those practices and incorporate other type of sustainable activities and expect to see those reductions on emissions. But because this ranch already has been doing sustainable practices rather than conventional practices, we did things the other way. We first modeled the current sustainable practices and compared to what will happen if they stop doing those sustainable practices and decide to do more conventional things like doing intensive tilling or overgrazing or many other things that could affect the emissions on the ecosystems. But I have been mentioning management practices for quite some time, but here I have some examples of probably the most prominent activities that they are doing in the past years. So they do grazing and crop in the ranch in different areas. They don't irrigate, so it's a completely dry crop production. They don't do any tilling in the area. They do seeding in critical areas. They do restoration of riparian areas, fencing, rotational grazing, and something that for me, well, at least for me as a ranchland researcher, was very interesting when I first went to that ranch. It was that one of their goals is to keep plant cover on the entire ranch, and it was surprising because they do have plant cover on the entire ranch, and this is something that I don't see very often because I have been working a lot with restoration, and this is the result of 20 years of doing those sustainable practices that eventually are going to give us those results with soil carbon sequestration. But as we know, nothing is perfect. So working with Comet Farm model actually gave us some challenges that we had to adapt ourselves in order to get the results, because this model was designed for small crop operations and not big scale grazing operations. So in many cases, we did not really have like a grazing option for rangelands, so we had to simulate a pasture with perennial grasses that the animals could graze, and from that extrapolate the results. Also, the farms or the ranches are really big in most cases, so we had to create multiple projects in order to fit those ranches in the model, or to divide the allotments into smaller parcels that the model could run in order to work properly. But probably one of the biggest challenges that I believe the common farm people is still working on is that it lacks soil data that is needed for modeling in many areas in which we are doing grazing. And this happens because the model has been developed for crops. And those areas, because they are not expecting to grow crops, they lack that soil data. So we have been communicating a lot with the people from this model and see how they can help us to get those results that we want. So far, we have been extrapolating results from the areas in which we get our data to those others, and of course, trying to understand and interpret our results carefully, because of course, this is just a model, but give us really interesting results. Because here, what I have to show are the results from soil organic carbon in the soil at the first 20 centimeters deep and between 20 and 60 on 3 years at 2 seasons. What we can see if we compare between the first and the last year is a statistically significant increase in soil organic carbon on the two depths, which for a dry land ecosystem, for soil organic carbon sequestration, it's actually a really interesting thing, because normally we don't expect to see big changes between 1 year and a second year. But we have to keep in mind that this is the result of 20 years of these management practices happening in this area, which again was a really interesting opportunity for us. But we still need more studies, because we eventually will need to understand when this ecosystem is going to reach the cap of soil carbon sequestration, because it's not going to last forever. But so far, we have been getting very interesting results. Here I have the total estimates of soil organic carbon in the entire area. So basically, we just multiply the total carbon mass per area for the entire operations of this ranch, which still is an estimate of what we have right now. But so far, this is the same trend that I showed in the graphs before, but this is now in tons of carbon by hectare, which is something that we have been seeing increasing. And these are the estimate of emissions from the entire operations of this ranch. This graph includes the cropping, the grazing, and the animal agriculture of this ranch. So everything that you do is happening on those results. If you see negative numbers, those negative numbers represent avoidance of emissions, which we can associate to carbon that is actually being captured in the system rather than being released to the system. And as you can see, the two bars here are negative numbers. The green one represents the sustainable practices, and the brown represents the conventional practices. The two of them are showing us that the system can fix carbon, so this ranch can be considered as a carbon sink. But maybe this difference doesn't seem too much. However, if we still analyze that this area is a really dry area, the results can be actually very interesting. And if we analyze the results more carefully, we see that actually the crops are the operations that may release more carbon if they are done in a less sustainable approach. For example, more tilling or a different type of fertilizer or different crops. This is going to have the biggest effect on emissions in this ranch. So we have, as I say, started this study in 2020. We have been doing this for this ranch since the past 3 years. And those results are based on 20 years of those recorded sustainable practices. And we're still doing this study because, as I mentioned at the beginning, we were approached by a farm group. So they are composed of actually 10 land managers, not just one. Now that we know how we work in this model and in this type of environments, we are conducting this same study in 9 other ranches that are part of the farm group. And if you know where is everything in the United States, you may have an idea that most of this is in the west of the country. So we have just one ranch in Oregon, which is where we have been doing the study, but we have many others in Colorado, some others in California, Nevada, Utah, and a new one in Idaho. So we have a really broad type of ecosystems, environments, soils, history that we can incorporate in this model to continue understanding how carbon sequestration works and happens in rangelands, and to provide more details or information to managers in how to properly manage their lands to store carbon sequestration that eventually will benefit them to have a better ecosystem and to provide possibly more value to the products that they have. And we still have more work to do to keep implementing this project, to have more additional activities to recommend to the people, and just keep working for what we are doing. And I just would like to give a thanks to the people that is working with me at Oregon State University, my collaborators from the USDA, and to Jeannie Carver from Shiny Wool Company for providing the funding for this study and for giving me the opportunity of being here with all of you today.
Thank you, David. One question while we change presentations. Go ahead.
Maybe you mentioned how do you validate those data from the models? So do you also have like gas measurements somehow? You have like positive emissions?
Okay. Can you say that again, the question?
How do you validate the model data or the model in general? So if you have like a positive emissions to the atmosphere,
to validate,
do you
yeah.
also, like have gas measurements somehow?
We're not doing gas measurements right now, but we are conducting this study with a lot of help from the developers from the model and with other advisors to try to understand what those numbers are, because we have found some cases in which we have a lot of emissions that we don't understand what's happening there, and we had to review really carefully all the models, because if something is wrong, it may give us a really weird result. So this has been being reviewed carefully also with the developers and the model that are giving us that validation to see if the results are correct or not. And this is actually taking time, but this is the best approach that we have been able to get.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mahendra Singh Pal, and he will visit with us on optimizing production technology for sustainable organic fodder production and soil health in the plains of India.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me introduce first. I am Dr. Mahendra Singh Pal. I am professor and head of Department of Agronomy at Govind Vallabh Pant University of Agriculture and Technology, Pantnagar, India. This is the first agriculture university established in India, and again it's one of the biggest university in India. And so the topic is optimizing the production technology for sustainable organic fodder production and soil health in Gangetic Plains of India. As you know, the India is an agrarian country, and the animal husbandry is the integral part of Indian rural economy, and that affects nearly the livelihood and food security of nearly 1 billion around the world. At present, we have a 536 million animal, but the total area allotted to the forest production is only 4.2% of the arable land of India. That is a static continuously for last 10 to 20 years. So there is no further increase, neither it's a scope because of the other requirement of the land, and therefore the India is shortfall of nearly 36% green fodder and 11% dry fodder and 44% concentrate. And again, so there is no further scope, only the vertical scope is there to increase the fodder production. And due to the application of the chemical fertilizer as well as the pesticides, and there is a deteriorating effect not only on natural resources but also on crop and fodder production. And again, and the increasing awareness of the chemical pollution, and again the increase of income, and due to the awareness of the people, and they are demanding the organic produce in form of crops, food, dairy products, and that forces us to produce the organic fodder. And so the duty of the agronomist is to give the production technology for the organic fodder production. And so this we have already told, increasing. So the organic nutrient management is the basic importance for the organic fodder production. And so the number of strategies are available, like farmyard manure, vermicompost, and different organic plant growth promoting. Just a minute. And so the plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, green manures. These are the Panchagab, Amrit Pani, Jivamrit, Ghan Jivamrit, and like the Konabjal and Glossolaria. These are the different bioenhancers. They can be used as not only for the plant protection but also for the nutrient management. And similarly, the type of organic farming, as you know, isn't it, the different types of organic production, organic technologies are there. Zero budget natural farming. This says it's a concept which promotes the organic farming without the off-farm or the market-oriented inputs, with the ecological friendly techniques under which, based on the 4 basic principles, like Bijamrit, this is used for the seed treatment before sowing. Jivamrit, it's again bioenhancer, it is used for application and not only in soil but also foliar spray on the crop. And similarly, mulching, and this is Bafasa, this is known as for the aeration. And second is a Panchagab Krishi. This is again one of the important, and so it uses the 5 products of the cow. This is a milk, curd, ghee. This is a gobar, cow dung, and urine. And so at a very specified proportion of these 5 products are used for the fermentation for 30 days. And later on, after filtration, this and 3 to 5% of this enhancer can be used for this foliar spray for boosting the growth and also for the plant protection. And similarly, Rishi Krishi, one of the again form this application here, the virgin soil 3% is used before sowing, and then the foliar spray of Amrit Pani and 3% at 20 days after sowing, and followed by after each cut it is sprayed. So this Amrit Pani can be prepared by mixing of 250 gram ghee plus 10 kg cow dung and 500 gram honey and 200 liter of water, and stir for continuously 20 days and then filter, and it can be used. Similarly, biodynamic agriculture, again, this is one of the concept. It is used for this is for healthy soil and produces the food that nourishes and vitalizes the humankind. And in this system, the energies from the cosmos, Mother Earth, Mother Cows, and plants are systematically and synergistically nourished. And the principle of biodynamic is making life-giving compost from dead material. Till now, so 9 biodynamic products have been prepared, and beginning from BD 500 to BD 508. And another form of Homa farming, this Homa farming has its origin from the Vedas, Indian Vedas, and is based on the principle that you heal the atmosphere and healed atmosphere will heal you. And so the basic aspect of the Homa farming is the chanting of Sanskrit mantras, Agnihotra Puja, and then after the Agnihotra Puja, the ash is remained, and this is used for the nutrient application, and it will give the different type of nutrients to the crops. Another form of Nutrico farming. So based on this concept for the organic fodder production, the experiment was laid out at an instructional dairy farm of the university in 2020 and 21 and 21 to 22 to optimize the production technology for organic fodder production. And so the soil was the experimental soil was silty clay loam in texture with 7.16 soil pH, 0.19 DSM EC, and the available organic carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium was 0.74% to 282.51, 28.16 here, and 235 respectively. And so the experiment consisted of 4 organic production system, vermicompost applying at the rate of 5 ton per hectare. And second one, the zero budget natural farming, here seed treatment with the Bijamrit, and then followed by the foliar spray or the soil application of Jivamrit. And then the third one, the Panchagab Krasi, and then again foliar spray of the Panchagabya, and then the Rishi Krasi, application of virgin soil as well as the Amrit Pani foliar spray. And 3 cropping systems were taken, giving the round the year fodder production, sorghum, followed by Versin, followed by maize and cowpea, and mixed cropping. And then the second one, the BN hybrid, followed by mixed with the cowpea in kharif season, and rabi season Versin, and again spring season or summer season rice bean. And the third rotation cropping system was maize as a sweet corn, followed by Versin and mustard in rabi season, and maize again in sweet corn, while laid out in a split plot design with 3 replications. So the result shows here, isn't it, the plant height, number of shoots per meter, leaf stem ratio, green fodder yield, dye fodder yield, equivalent fodder yield, and economics. And so one by one I will give you the effect of organic fodder production system on plant height. So the plant height was affected significantly by different production systems. And so the vermicompost gave the highest yield of sorghum, and followed by Rishi Krisi 194. And then the plant height of the main crop was almost significantly equal in zero budget natural farming and Panchagab Krisi. Similarly, effect on the leaf stem ratio, it was not affected significantly, but and the highest was observed in Rishi Krisi 0.78, and the Panchagab Krisi 0.82%, followed by zero budget natural farming. And the effect of green fodder production, the highest green fodder production, significantly highest green fodder production was observed under vermicompost and followed by Rishi Krisi. Similarly, effect of gross and net return, the highest gross and net return was observed under application of vermicompost, followed by Rishi Krisi. But the net return, if you see, and this red color, and the highest net return was observed under again the vermicompost, followed by zero budget natural farming. Because of the zero budget natural farming, the cost of production was lower as compared to other production system. Then come to the effect of cropping system on different parameters. Again, the highest plant height was observed under sorghum first cropping system, followed by the third one, sweet sorghum, and the lowest in BN hybrid second. And the effect of production system, number of shoots, it was not the highest shoot under the BN hybrid, because of the number of cuttings were there, and so the highest shoots were observed. Again, the leaf stem ratio was again observed the significantly highest under second crop rotation, that is a BN hybrid. And on the green fodder yield, again the highest green fodder yield was observed under the BN hybrid with combination of cowpea, because of the continuously 5-6 cuttings but taken in a year. And these were a single cutting. Both sorghum were having a 3 cutting, and maize was sweet sorghum only single cut. And then the effect of green fodder yield, again the highest green fodder yield was again observed in BN hybrid with the combination of cowpea. And similarly, the net return. And so the conclusion, the zero budget natural farming had the highest BC ratio because of the lower cost of production, And however, the highest grain and fodder yield were recorded at the application of vermicompost, but the higher cost of vermicompost lowered the BC ratio. And similarly, the intercropping of cowpea, berseem and rice bean with the BN hybrid gave the highest fodder yield as well as the BC ratio. Therefore, it may be concluded and that the BN hybrid intercropped with cowpea, berseem and rice bean may be grown under zero budget natural farming for the higher fodder yield, net return and soil health. And again, this cropping system will give the round year green fodder production. Thank you very much.